Nivaranam Astrapogai Sadhya Hare 35 Anucharo Uru Vyataha Tatpadagraho Apatatam Adhikatarena Teshamitiritamubhava Vadaya Goram Tam Brahmadanda Manivaranamastra Pugai Sadyo Harir Anucharavaru Bibyatastat Pada Krahava Patatam Atikatarena Tesham Itiritam Ubhavava Dayagoram Tam Brahmadanda Manivaranamastra Pugahe Sadyo Harir Anucharavuru Bibyatastat Pada Grahava Patatam Matikatarena Teshamitiritamubhava Dayagoram Ham Brahmadanda Manivaranamastra Pugahe Sadyo Harir Anucharavuru Bibyatastat Pada Grahava Patatam Atikatarena Please chant. Keshamitiritamubhava Vadaya Goram Sadyo Harir Anuchara Bibhyastat Pada Grahava Patatam Atikatarena Keshamitiritamubhava Vadaya Goram Sadyo Harir Anucharavu Bibhyastat Pada Grahava Patatam Atikatarena Keshamitiritamubhava Vadaya Goram Sadyo Harir Anucharavu Bibhyastat Pada Grahava Patatam Atikatarena. Want to try it? This is your big opportunity. There's only a few of us here to judge you. No. The secret, I'll tell you the secret. The secret is to just say one syllable at a time. That's part of this. And the other thing is, the letters with the bar on them, they're twice as long, and that helps you with the meter. Yeah, very good. Tesham etiritam ubhava vadaya goram. Brahma danda mani bara namascha pugai. The C is pronounced sha. The CH is pronounced sha, and not, yeah. So it's anuchara. Yeah. And then another thing to know that makes it easier is the O and the E are also twice as long as the shorter vowels. So it's sadyo, harer, anucharav, like that. Okay? Try it. So you do it one syllable at a time. Bib, bia, tas, tat. Very good. Okay, last. Sadyo, harer, anuchara, vurupebya vas, tat. Pada, grahava, patitam, atika, tarena. Very good. You're getting it down. It's just a matter of time. So we'll go through the word meanings. Tesham, of the four Kumaras. Iti, thus. Iritam, uttered. Mubal, workers. Abdarya, understanding. Goram, terrible. Tam, that. Brahmadandam, curse of a Brahmana. Anivaranam, not able to be counteracted. Ashtrapugai, by any kind of weapon. Sadhyaha, at once. Harehe, of the Supreme Lord. Anucharao, devotees. Uru, very much. Bibyataha, became fearful. Padagrahao, grasping their feet. Apatatam, fell down. Atikatarena, in great anxiety. Translation. When the doormen of Vaikuntha Loka, who were certainly devotees of the Lord, found that they were going to be cursed by the Brahmanas, they at once became very much afraid and fell down at the feet of the Brahmanas in great anxiety. For Brahmanas' curse could not be counteracted by any kind of weapon. Please repeat. When the doormen of Vaikuntha Loka, who were certainly devotees of the Lord, found that they were going to be cursed by the Brahmanas, they at once became very much afraid and fell down at the feet of the Brahmanas in great anxiety. For a Brahmana's curse cannot be counteracted by any kind of weapon. Report by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami, Śrimad Prabhupada. Although by chance the doormen committed a mistake by checking the Brahmanas from entering the gate of Vaikuntha, they were at once aware of the gravity of the curse there are many kinds of offenses, but the greatest offense is to offend a devotee of the Lord. Because the doormen were also devotees of the Lord, they were able to understand their mistake and were terrified when the 4 Kumars were ready to curse them. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Gauravani Pachaya Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Shri Veda Gadadhar Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Vischa Kripa Sindhu Beva Chapatan Pavani Vaishnavi Shri Radha Govinda Ki Shri Mahaprabhu Ki Shri Bhagavan Ki. So, pastime is unfolding and taking a turn for the worse here. So we're learning about the severity of a brahmana's curse. Here the words devotee and brahmanas are used as if they're the same. Sometimes Prabhupada draws a distinction between devotees and brahmanas, or Vaishnavas and brahmanas. It's described in the Śrimad Bhāgavatam that Vedanti tat tattva vidas tat brahma gyadishkanam advayam brahmeti paramatmeti bhagavaniti shabhyate. The absolute truth is that non-dual substance which is Brahman, Paramatma, and Bhagavan. So the supreme absolute truth has 3 phases, and the highest is Bhagavan, the Supreme Lord, the personal form, and the spiritual body of the personality of God, and the partial manifestation of the Lord situated in the core of the heart, and then the all-pervading consciousness or light, which is described to be the aura of God, the effulgence of God is Brahman. So you can be a brahmana if you just know Brahman, and you don't know Paramatma or Bhagavan. But if you're a devotee, you know all 3 aspects of the supreme absolute truth of the Supreme Lord. But here it's saying that even the harshly learned brahmana, his curse is also not something that you want to have happen to you. So, because the doorkeepers of Vaikuntha, they were Vaishnavas, they were enlightened with Vaishnava philosophy, and they knew how severe the Brahmana's curse was. And it comes up in the Bhāgavatam, there's other instances of people being cursed by Brahmanas. And the one that really stuck in my mind was the person who really struck me as really concerned about a Brahmana's curse was Maharaj Rahugana. So the story about Maharaj Rahugana is interesting. It's a very long story, actually. We have to start at the beginning. So I can never fill up these classes with an hour stuff. So I will tell some of the story of Maharaj Bharata and King Rahugana. So there was this king who renounced his kingdom. Do you know the story about Maharaj Bharata? It's a fascinating story. This king renounced his kingdom to pursue Krishna, and he was meditating in the forest, and he got to the level of bhava, which is just next to prema, which is love of God. But what happened was there was a pregnant deer who was scared by it was a lion or a tiger or a hunter or something, and it had a miscarriage, and this fawn was born, but the mother died or left, one or the other. So the fawn had nobody to take care of it. So he took time out of his devotional practice to take care of the fawn. And he became so much attached even though he could renounce his kingdom and his wives and his sons and everything, in this, and he'd given up everything and he was performing devotional service in the forest, he became attached to this fawn. So he took his next birth as a deer. And then, but in that life he could remember that he used to be a devotee. So instead of hanging out with the other deers, he hung out in the part of the forest where the sages would meditate, and he performed austerities by eating dried leaves. At the end of that life, he remembered a prayer that he offered to the personality of Godhead. So then he took birth as Jadbharata, and he remembered his previous lives. So he decided that he wouldn't interact with anybody at all who might mislead him from his spiritual practice, and he just, within himself, he meditated on the personality of Godhead. And but somehow or other he got the king Rahugana needed 4 people to carry his palanquin, and one of them retired. So he saw this guy with no particular engagement and engaged him in carrying the palanquin. But because he was a devotee, he stepped on the ants in the path. So he was always trying to avoid the ants and whatever else was crawling on the ground. And therefore it was very bumpy rock. King. So the king was very puffed up and he was very upset that he was being insulted by having his palanquin carried and said all kinds of nasty things to Jadbharata. And Jadbharata replied with transcendental knowledge about all the insults that were addressed to him. And then he realized this isn't an ordinary paladin. This is actually an elevated devotee. And then when he realized that, he uttered this verse from the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, which I'll read. My dear sir, I'm not at all afraid of the thunderbolt of King Indra, nor am I afraid of the serpentine piercing trident of Lord Shiva. I do not care about the punishment of Yamaraj, the superintendent of death, nor am I afraid of fire, scorching sun, moon, wind, nor the weapons of Kuvera. Yet I am afraid of offending a Brahmana. I'm very much afraid of this. So that strikes me as the person who had the greatest realization of how bad this was. I don't recall anybody really describing it as being that bad. So Prabhupada has a short purport which gives a little more information about how bad it is to offend Brahmana or Vaishnava. When Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was instructing at the Dashrameda Ghat in Prayag, he pointed out very clearly the seriousness of offending a Vaishnava. He compared the Vaishnava aparad to Hati Mata, a mad elephant. So Hati means elephant. basically negligent of his greatness that we dared do something that upset him to the extent that he wanted to curse us. So, of course, one could talk about the how one gets in such a state of mind that it has to do with ignorance of their spiritual position due to being falsely proud of oneself. People in the actually the beginning of knowledge, according to Krishna and Bhagavad Gita, is humility and pridelessness. And but people become proud of their own attributes, and therefore their knowledge of how great the Vaishnavas are, how dear they are to Krishna, and how dangerous it is to offend them, becomes covered over by their false pride, and they act whimsically, doing things that offend the Vaishnavas. There's in the Krishna book we hear the story of the sons of Kuvera, Nalu, Kuvara, and Manigriva, and they were enjoying in an intoxicated state in heaven with heavenly damsels, and they were intoxicated that when Narada came there, they were completely naked, actually. And you're not supposed to be naked in the presence of anybody, really. But especially in the presence of a great sage like Narada Muni. And he didn't appreciate their behavior, being the sons of Kuvera, who's one of the leading demigods. He's the treasurer of the demigods. They should be enlightened beings, and they should know enough not to prance around naked in the presence of a sage. The damsels, they were less intoxicated, so they covered themselves up, but not the. So they were cursed. Of course, the good thing about being cursed by somebody on the level of Narada Muni is such a compassionate Vaishnava that he always wants to give somebody a benediction at the same time he curses them. So although they were cursed to be trees because he thought that they were acting without proper consciousness, so they should attain a life form that had a lack of consciousness, such as a tree. But they could remember why they were trees. And he cursed them that they would be in the courtyard of Raj. And when Krishna appeared as a child, he would relieve them from their curse. So they actually have the benediction of seeing Krishna, which is exceedingly rare, because Krishna just comes basically once in a day of Brahma, which is a very long time. A day of Brahma is 4,320,000,000 years. So Krishna only comes once, and he's only here for 125 years. So the odds that he'll be here at the same time he is very slight. And then the odds that you'll actually run into him, because the planet is very large, and the place where Krishna is pretty small. It's highly unlikely. So there was highly unlikely that, and plus, to really get anywhere near Krishna, you have to be highly elevated. And these people were in the mode of engaging in basically intoxication and illicit sex, so they weren't really on a high level of consciousness that they're going to come in the presence of Krishna. So they're very blessed by this amazing benediction by Narada Muni. So we're enjoined by Lord Chaitanya in our practice of Krishna consciousness to cultivate tolerance and humility. And if we actually do cultivate tolerance and humility, we'll be unlikely to offend people because we'll be considering them to be superior to us, and we'll be considering that we're actually supposed to be serving them in some way and not judging them or criticizing them or restricting them, which would bring about them cursing us. So if we actually do, and the way one way you can become humble is if you meditate on all your bad qualities and you meditate on everybody else's good qualities. Then you'll think, these people are highly elevated and I'm insignificant. And then you'll have a humble mentality and you'll be inclined to render service to people and glorify people rather than disrupt people's service and offend people, as people do when they become proud and then leave themselves open to committing some kind of an offense. So then if we do offend the people, as being illustrated in these two examples, we should ask to be excused. So first we have to know that we offended the people. And sometimes people are so oblivious, they don't actually know that they're offending people. Like the Soviet regime in Russia was very oblivious to the result of offending different religious people, including devotees, that they offended in their different prison camps and psychiatric centers. They performed grievous offenses to people, Hare Krishnas and other devotees of God, and therefore this big communist threat that people were worrying about for decades sort of dissolved in a very short time. But one can see it as a result of their policy of torturing people who had dedicated their life to God. Their whole regime dissolved without the need for any nuclear weapons. So there's another. Of course, there are other stories of curses. The big story of curses, of course, the one in the beginning of the Śrimad Bhāgavatam, where Maharaj Parikshit, because this sage doesn't give him some water when he asks for it, in the Vedic culture, when a guest comes to your place, you're supposed to offer them some water, a place to seat, and some sweet words, and also some prasadam. So the sage, Samika Rishi, he was meditating, so he wasn't focused on receiving guests, But in Maharaj Parikshit, generally, because he was a highly advanced devotee, wouldn't have been disturbed by it. But somehow or other, it said by the influence of the Lord, he felt offended, and he put a dead snake around the neck as a garland of the sage. So that's not a very nice thing to do. If somebody gave me a dead snake instead of this garland, I wouldn't feel very happy about it. I didn't know whether I would curse them. I wouldn't say good things about them, that's for sure. So at any rate, so the rishi, he wasn't actually offended by it, but his son was immature, and he took it as a great offense to his father. And at that point in history, even the son of a brahmana was very powerful, and he cursed Maharaj Parikshit to die in 7 days from the bite of a snake bird, and that's how the whole Śrimad Bhāgavatam was recited, because he went to the bank of the Ganges with a vow to fast to death, and he asked the sages for advice about what to do. And Shukadev Goswami showed up, and the sages realized that he was the person who was the most realized and should answer the questions of Maharaj Parikshit. So the whole Bhāgavatam was. And it's said that Maharaj Parikshit was such a powerful Vaishnava that he could have counteracted the curse. But he didn't. He saw this is the plan of the Lord. Because the Lord advises in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 8, text 5, Ante Kale Smarna Eva. Anybody remember that? Party Samadbhava. No, I get it mixed up with 7. That one should remember, whoever remembers him at the time of death attains him without doubt. So if you know you're going to die in 7 days, you can really focus on your program and remember Krishna. If you may live for another 70 years, you might be lackadaisical about your attempts to focus your mind on Krishna. But when you know you only have 7 days, then it's actually good to know when you're going to die. In fact, there was another story. There was a story of Maharaj Katvanga, who was such a powerful fighter that he fought on behalf of the demigods. And they were so pleased with him, they decided to give him a benediction. So he could have asked for all the opulences of heaven, he could have asked for a lifetime of 10,000 years or all kinds of wealth. But he asked to know how much longer he had to live, because then he knew how much time he could prepare for death. So this was actually a benediction to know how long you're going to live. And therefore, he knew this, I've got 7 days, this is my opportunity to fix my mind on Krishna. And they've just heard these sages glorifying the Lord for the last 7 days of his life, day and night. And he says, he expresses that in the 10th canto, as he's hearing the pastimes of Krishna, he says that going without sleep and without eating and drinking for an ordinary man, for me, might be challenging, but I'm feeling so much nectar from the recitation of Krishna's pastimes that it doesn't even disturb me. So it became so transcendently situated, we were actually beyond the influence of the material energy, just by this intense hearing and chanting. And there's other curses too. There's the curse of Maharaj Chitraketu. Chitraketu, he had an airplane. Celestial singers with him. And, he saw that Lord Shiva, he was in the midst of some sages, and he had his wife was on his lap, So generally, you can imagine if Pancharatna Prabhu was giving class and his wife was sitting on his lap, that people might say something, right? He might say something. At least he might think of something. So at any rate, so Maharaj... Yeah, I know. Hopefully he won't curse me. So anyway, so Chitraketu, he said something, like, who but Lord Shiva could get away with, doing this? He knew Shiva was above everyone and could do whatever he wanted. So it was just sort of humorous for him. But Shiva's wife Parvati took it very seriously, and I curse you to become a demon. So he was cursed to become a demon, but actually he was such an elevated devotee, he remembered that his devotional service. So it became, he was Vitrasura, a demon, but he had a great devotional attitude. And he was actually more elevated in Krishna consciousness than Indra. He was engaged in a fight with Indra, But he ended up preaching to Indra in the course of the fight. Um, and he actually wanted Indra to kill him because he knew, because he was absorbed in thinking of Krishna, that he would go back to God. And so he was encouraging him. So in that case, because he was so elevated, his Vaishnavism wasn't, completely covered over. It was just his progress was sort of delayed because he had to have this birth instead of attaining perfection in that life of Chitraketu, he had to take another birth as a demon and then attain perfection in that life. So basically what happens is, if we offend our devotee, our devotional service becomes covered. And therefore we may go away from the devotees for this life, and maybe in the next life we regain it. Because it's also said that whatever you do for Krishna, it's not completely obliterated, but it can be covered over by offenses. So, after hearing all these bad things about offending devotees, offending brahmanas, we might be really worried. So I wanted to tell one last pastime to give us some hope. This is a pastime from the best book ever written, Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita. Because Chaitanya Charitamrita is the best book because it has all the best Bhāgavatam verses, the best Bhagavad Gita verses, the best verses from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and it's got verses from Krishna Karnamrita and Govinda Lilamrita, the best verses from Rupa Goswami's Padyavali, his personal verse book, are on Chaitanya Charitamrita, along with the sweet pastimes of Lord Chaitanya. So nothing really can compare to the Chaitanya Charitamrita. So in Chaitanya Charitamrita, there's this Lord Chaitanya and his intimate associates, they're having this nocturnal kirtans. They're chanting Hare Krishna all night in great ecstasy because they're always on the highest level of devotional service. But the people who weren't on that level of Krishna consciousness weren't allowed in. And some of them were pretty upset about it, including one Brahmana. So another Brahmana came to see the kirtan performance, but the door was closed and he could not enter the home. He returned home with an unhappy mind. But on the next day, he met Lord Chaitanya on the bank of the Ganges and spoke to him. That Brahmana was very expert in talking harshly and cursing others. Thus he broke his sacred thread and declared, "I shall now curse you, for your behavior has greatly aggrieved me." The Brahmana cursed the Lord. "You shall be bereft of all material happiness." When the Lord heard this, he felt great jubilation within himself, because he realized that material happiness is the cause of great bondage, and to be bereft of it is very good. So then the next verse is, any faithful person who hears of this Brahmana's cursing Lord Chaitanya is delivered from all Brahminical curses. So that gives you some hope. So,
that's the emergency
yeah.
verse. If you ever offend somebody, you just read that.
So somehow or other, I've filled the time up to 8:48, which is unusual for me. So I guess we can stop here and ask if there are any questions or comments or further elucidations from our audience, beginning with His Holiness Chandrasekhar Swami.
Actually, as you were mentioning these various instances of cursing, I meditated on a few different ones, and I saw that there is kind of an interesting principle here that, not in every curse, but in many of them, is that often it offended by someone, but actually they're the offenders.
Hmm.
An obvious case of this is like, of course, Daksha,
Hmm.
feeling he was offended by Shiva, but actually he's the offender. And, the one with Cricket, he thought he was being offended by the sage, but actually he was the one that was doing the offense. And again, with Chitraketu, Parvati thought that Chitraketu was the offender, but actually in one sense she was the offender. So
Hmm.
it's interesting how that works, that a person imagines that the person they're offending is actually offending them. As I thought about that, I had never really, but when I used over the various different instances, I saw how this is kind of something that's there in many
Hmm.
cases of offending. And, again, in Rahugana's case, Maharaj Rahugana thinks that this Jadavarat is acting in a very, offensive manner, but actually he's the one that's offensive. So sometimes when you feel you're offended, you are actually getting ready to do the real offense.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to put that in my blog because it's such a nice comment. Before I forget. Sometimes.
I never, until this moment, you were discussing it, I never picked up on the fact that that seems to be not so much maybe in the Jai and Vijay case, but it is here in these other cases. There's this, Daksha goes through a whole soliloquy about it, how, I don't talk about the behavior of gentle people, but of ruffians like this Lord Shiva who married my daughter who has eyes like a dove and he has eyes like, something. And then he goes on to decide that Lord Shiva shouldn't have a share in the sacrifice and he creates this whole offense. And of course, as a result of it, he gets the immediate kickback from that whole thing. Eventually, he gets his head cut off. Pretty serious effect of him imagining Lord Shiva had offended him because I guess, he felt that Lord Shiva was his junior, being his, son-in-law, when actually Lord Shiva is much older than Daksha.
Hmm.
He was the second being in the universe after the four Kumars. So, from that perspective, she was certainly superior to Daksha. But Daksha saw it from the other side of the coin because he married Daksha's daughter.
And instead of seeing Shiva in the greatest way, he could see him. He saw him in the worst way. He could see.
Of course, Lord Shiva looks funny, so I think that kind of contributed to his malappraisal
Mm.
of Shiva.
That also that happened with there's that sage that's bent in 8 places and walked funny, and then he was offended by some people who joked about his, and then, but he cursed them to be what was it, crocodiles?
Ashtavakra, isn't that the name of the sage?
Yeah. Yes.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you for that, by the way. Yes.
So as you were mentioning that for brahmanas, they have to be just even Brahman realized. So they actually
Yeah, you can be the entry level brahmana.
Yes. So we see here actually it was also true with the four Kumaras because in the further verses later on it's mentioned they were just impersonalists. Later on they became Vaishnavas and they got the smell of Tulsi from the lotus feet of Vishnu. So as of now here we see Brahmanas, they are cursing the associates of Lord Vishnu, which is Jai Jai. So in a way we can take it as Brahmanas cursing the Vaishnavas. So curses the Vaishnavas. For example, when Durvasa Muni tried to
Right.
attack Amrish Maharaj with the hair demon, so then Vishnu went to save him. He told Durvasa Muni to finally beg forgiveness from Amrish. But here, I just want to ask, is there any corrective action forced upon the four Kumaras by Vishnu so they can ask forgiveness from Jai? How does this work? Why doesn't it work here?
That's an interesting point.
What was the question?
Well, the like in the case of like Durvasa and Ambarish, right? You have a brahmana cursing a devotee, and here it's the same thing. You have the brahmana cursing a devotee, and there, but it's it's like that the Durvasa has to go to the devotee, Ambarish, and beg for forgiveness, but the Kumars aren't having to beg the doorkeeper for forgiveness, So how's that, basically? Is that what you're saying? Yeah. So, one thing I just wanted to make before I let Chandrasekhar Maharaj answer. No, one thing that is it's interesting because although they're described as being impersonalists before, it's also described that they became angry because their desire to see the Lord was being frustrated. So that doesn't sound like an impersonalist to me, really. For one thing, an impersonalist doesn't think the Lord has it for me, and so he wouldn't be angry at not seeing it, So, I'm not sure that you can really say conclusively that they're impersonalists, at that point. But do you have any insight into that?
Well, I would respond to this. The class that I gave a couple of days ago, where we were talking about Karma 101.
Right. Oh yeah.
This is
Karma 301.
an example of Karma 301 because the Madhurya Kadambini gives evidence that Jai and Vijay volunteered
Right.
to fight with the Lord. And they said, my dear Lord, we surveyed the material world, and we see that you are eager for a fight, but we see that there are no powerful demons in the material world. Now, we are very powerful, but we are not inimical to you. So if you like, please make our mentality suitable, because we cannot bear that your desires go unfulfilled in any capacity. So this is what they say. So this is a setup. In one sense, it's a pretext. It's not a genuine curse. Of course, we see that right after these verses, the four Kumaras will feel ashamed
Right.
that they have cursed Jai and Vijay.
Mm.
But Vishnu, who's there at that time, says, no, I approve of the curse.
Mm.
So, this is one of those examples of we needed a pretext. Where
Right.
some of these other things, the Supreme Lord's not carrying out a particular pastime.
Right.
In some cases, it's a person who's ignorant cursing somebody who is exalted, or in some cases, like with Parikit, this again I think is a Karma 301
Right.
situation where he acted in a way that he normally would not have acted. But what was the purpose? So that the Bhāgavatam could be spoken. So that was the reason behind it. But Parvati cursing Chitraketu, that's not really in that category. So we see that there's this kind of.
Mm.
I think oftentimes when we kind of evaluate it on that level, is the Lord creating a pastime and creating a pretext? That's a special kind of situation.
Yeah.
Or is it not that? It's
Mm.
just some kind of situation happening, which I think is what was going on here.
Okay.
Actually, I thought of another. It's one of those really sort of humorous stories in the Mahabharata,
Okay.
where where there's this sage named Utanka,
Hmm.
and Utanka evidently lived in the desert, and one time Krishna was traveling through the desert, and he came across Utanka, and Utanka had took darshan of Krishna, and he said, "My dear Krishna, I have heard that there's this great battle of Kurukshetra that was going to take place, and I know you must have stopped it. Please tell me in what way, by what masterful plan of yours, you stopped the battle of Kurukshetra from happening."
Hmm.
And Krishna replied to Utanka, "My dear Utanka, I didn't stop the battle of Kurukshetra. It did happen, and it exhausted the lives of all the Kshatriyas on the earth." And Utanka said, "How could you have done that?" He said, I can't believe you didn't stop the battle of Kurukshetra." And he said, "I curse you, Krishna."
That's
So here is Utanka cursing Krishna. And Krishna says, "My dear Utanka." These are very bizarre conversations. Then he says, "My dear Utanka, I am the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Your curse won't be affected, but you will lose all of your pious credit that you have accrued from all the wonderful activities." So it's interesting, Krishna is replying like this to Utanka. "So I think you should not try to curse me." But he said that I will give you a benediction. And so he said, "My dear Utanka, what benediction would you like?"
wow.
And Utanka said, "Well, I live in the desert, so sometimes there's no water. So if sometime I'm very parched, can you make it so that I will have some water?" And Krishna says, "So be it." And so it goes on, there's another aspect to it that then Utanka's in the desert and he's very thirsty. So he thinks, "Oh, Krishna's giving me his benediction, so I will make it, I will ask for some water." So he's meditating on trying to have some water. And for a little while, nothing happens. And then he sees a Shudra with several dogs. And he's very, is a very smelly, sort of low caste person. And he says, "I am here to deliver your water." And what he does is he passes water into a cup and he hands it to Utanka. And Utanka is just enraged by it. And he's thinking, this Krishna is such a trickster. What kind of reciprocation is this? And he's angered by it. And so the next time he sees Krishna, he says, "What kind of arrangement was that for me to get my thirst quenched?" And Krishna calls Indra. And he says, "Indra, I told you to give Utanka water." And Indra said, "Well, and I told you to give him heavenly nectar along with the water." And Indra said, "But Utanka is not qualified for the heavenly nectar." And so I gave it to him in a way I knew he would reject it. And so you begin to see how convoluted this whole thing
Wow.
is. That actually he was being benedicted,
Right.
but because of the way things looked externally, he rejected it. So, this is interesting how the nature of the material world, the nature of the interaction with the Lord, with his devotees. And then Krishna said, "From now on, if you want water, I will make water come from clouds." And those are called Utanka clouds. That, if somebody's in the desert and has need for water, that water will come and he can have it that way. But Utanka passed up the chance to have heavenly nectar because Indra actually created a situation that would make him reject it.
Thank you for that. There's always more to learn from the Mahabharata.
Yeah, it's one of the oddest stories I've read in the Mahabharata. Tatanka is actually a disciple of some very prominent sage. I've forgotten who it is, someone that we know.
There's probably many lessons that can be learned from that story, but unfortunately it's 4 minutes after 9. Thank everyone for their kind attention. Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki. I guess